Howdy guys. In this video we're going to be going over how to create simple geometry in Houdini and some tips and tricks for working with nodes in the network view. So since we're going to be working in the network view, I'm going to make my network view a little bit bigger and drag this out like that. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so first off we're going to create a geometry node with tab, and you'll notice that just like in previous videos, the geometry node will create this XYZ box by default that is created with any geometry node that you create in Houdini. So we can dive down into this node. Right now we are at the object level. We can dive down into this node's geometry level by double-clicking it. And now we can see our file node inside our geometry level. We can go back up to the object level with U. We can also have our node selected and press I to go inside that node. We could also see this more visually by looking at our operator tree, which can be shown on or off with Shift W. The operator tree shows the hierarchy similar to the outliner in Maya of how your objects are laid out in Houdini. This can get pretty thick pretty fast, but it's nice to be able to visually see what's going on. So here our geometry is sitting in our object level, and here we can step down and see our file inside that geometry node. We're just going to go hide that. And let's go ahead and delete this file node. So let's go ahead and make a box. You'll notice that our tab menu is a lot bigger than before. This is all of the types of nodes that we can make inside of a geometry node, and I'll just start typing box, and I can either select it from the menu and drop our box node down, and we'll see it's got all of its parameters up here, so we can mess with its size, we can off-center it, we can give it a uniform scale, we can also change its primitive type. And you'll notice that by changing its primitive type between different things, different parameters become enabled or disabled. So primitive type when working in Houdini, unlike most other 3D modeling programs, is very fluid, and it's pretty simple to switch back and forth between different primitive types as you're working. We'll go more over this and the convert node and how primitive type operations come in really handy for certain operations later. So when working with any node in Houdini, there's a lot of parameters, and some nodes have just a lot of parameters. There's a lot of stuff you can do with different nodes. One of the best ways to learn Houdini is to just mess around with what different nodes can do. And Houdini has really good documentation to explain what each nodes do. And this is really easily accessible by just clicking this little question mark guy in the upper right hand corner of the parameters view. I'll wait for this to load, and we get this Houdini help page, and it is the documentation for everything that our box node is capable of doing. So we can see what the primitive types do and axis divisions and all of that fun stuff up here. So I highly encourage everyone to check out that Houdini documentation. It's incredibly helpful. Alright, so let's go ahead back up to our object level, and let's make a sphere. So you'll notice there I was able to make a new sphere, and I didn't have to create a geometry node. If I hit tab and just look at geometry, it doesn't show up here, but if we go down to all, I can see this is all of the things that I can create on the object level, and all of the basic, we can see sphere right here, all of the basic geometry types are available here from the start. So you'll notice when we have this sphere created, it's right on top of our geometry node. Let's go ahead and offset that a little bit, straighten up my scene view. And I can see both of them at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and double click and name this one sphere. I'll name this one box. Houdini displays the output of each geometry node, and we can toggle these displays on and off by just selecting this display flag up here or on the radial menu. And we can do this for both of them or view any of them all all at the same time. So just like we can create geometry over in the network view, we can just as easily create geometry with the tab menu straight in our scene. So if I hit tab in the scene, the same thing will appear, and I can just hit grid, and now I have a grid that I can perform base operations to and modify its parameters. And you'll notice it has taken me automatically into the grid node of the geometry level. We'll go ahead and hop out. Let's just move that off to the side again. So we can also, let's go ahead and delete that grid. We can also create geometry using the radial menu inside of the Houdini scene view. And I'll explain more of how to use this radial menu in future videos, but for now we're going to go down to create, and then let's just create a tube. I'll select where we put it, and voila, we have a tube. So real quick, just I know I said I'd go over it later, but this radial menu is a quick access means of getting to all of the nodes that we can access over here through the tab menu. So most of the things that you can access through the tab menu, we can also easily access here directly in the scene view. I'm not a giant fan of this system. I think it's a little bit clunky, but it does exist if you wish to use it. So let's step out, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete that tube. And let's get rid of this box as well, and we're going to go ahead and dive into our sphere, and let's center it back out on the origin. So let's say I want to create a box inside here next to my sphere. I can hit tab and type box, and then I'll get a box next to my sphere. Notice I have only one display flag per geometry level. So if I go ahead and display my box, then I can see my box, and if I go back over here, I can see my sphere. And that's well and good. But what happens if I am over in my scene view and I create a box? You'll notice it has taken us out back to the object level and created a box object for us up there, and then we can dive back in and view our box inside its other level. So if I want to be able to create boxes in the context of my sphere geometry, we can do this by going up to this little thing, the icon up here. It looks like 3 circles on a grid, and click on it and select Create in Context. And now we'll see 3 boxes inside of a cube, and if I hit Tab, Box, it has created my box object inside my sphere object. And you'll notice it has templated my sphere object in here. When working with multiple nodes inside the geometry level, it's important to remember that the parameter view changes based off of the node you currently have selected, not necessarily the node that you are currently displaying. So in this case, I have selected and I am displaying my box node, but if I go and select my sphere node, you'll notice my parameters window has changed. And I can move and modify my parameters of my sphere while my box is displaying. If I go back and view my sphere there, and likewise I can select my box and move my box around or scale it and what have you. And this is a really cool feature that Houdini has, but if you're not completely aware that that's what it's doing, it can get kind of confusing, so I just wanted to make sure that I pointed that out. Be aware of which node you have selected when trying to modify parameters. So let's try to view both of these objects at one time. So let's click on the output node on this sphere, and we'll just click and drag and we'll get this wire, and I'll hit tab and type merge, and then enter. And this will bring a merge node down, and I can move back down into my merge node, and let's click and drag my box down into my merge node, and now I can display both my box and my merge at the same time. So you'll notice that Houdini behaves kind of like a network tree. So I can step up into my sphere and modify my sphere. And then I can similarly go down to my merge, and the changes from my sphere will go down into my merge, which will also bring in my box. I can also, while displaying my merge, still go through and modify my box higher up in the network. It's similar to always having your history available when you're working on something. So to put this into a better example, let's go ahead and click on this line and hit Tab and Transform, and we'll add a transform node in here, and we can go ahead and move our sphere up a little bit. We'll go back down to our merge, and then we can see again I can step through my sphere and then to the transform and then to the merge. So in this transform node, I can bypass any nodes along a chain. So I can bypass with this yellow icon right here on the left, and you'll notice that it is going around or skipping my transform node. This can be really useful when testing things out in future Houdini workflows. Similarly, we can use the template node. So let's go ahead and template my sphere up here. And now I'm modifying my transform, and I have my original sphere here and my transform position up here. So I can see where my sphere originally was in relation to my transform node. So disconnecting nodes. Connecting nodes is pretty easy. You can just click and drag in. Disconnecting nodes, we can either right-click on a connection that we have made, click on a connection we've made, right-click, and then hit disconnect node. Similarly, we can select a node and then just shake it by moving the mouse, and it will disconnect all of the inputs into that node. Similarly, we can alt-click on a connection and then use that to reconnect, and you'll notice our transform has carried now over to our box. Or we can just alt-click and click away into nothing, and the connection is broken. Notice that this giant exclamation point has showed up on the left of my thing. This is Houdini letting me know that I've broken something. It is an error message. In order to see what's actually happening, I can middle mouse click on my node, and it will bring up my node info. And it will say error, not enough sources specified. So the transform node cannot exist on its own. It has to have some kind of input. So we can fix this by just reconnecting our sphere back to our transform input. Now this node info is incredibly useful. It allows you to see node errors, warnings. See, when we fix it, we can see how many points, primitives, vertices, attributes are in our object, which is all really useful information. We can even click on this little icon over here on the radial menu, and it will pop up a window that we can move around to help us see what we have. Notice, though, after I click on it and I click somewhere else, the window will go away. I can make it stay by hitting this little pin icon in the upper left-hand corner, and it will stay open. I can even tell it to refresh automatically or refresh as I make changes to it. So for example, we are working down in our transform. I can go up to my sphere and change its primitive type from a simple primitive to a polygon, and our points, primitives, and vertices have all updated. Likewise, I can make changes to it. Let's increase the frequency and refresh our transforms node info, and our point and primitive info have also updated. This info tab is also incredibly useful for entering node comments. So this is a sphere, and I can show this comment in the network view. And now I can see my comment here right next to my node. This is really helpful for sharing your files with other people. It helps them understand what you were doing, and it helps you understand what you were doing if you come back to something you haven't looked at in a while. And you can show or hide this comment as you see fit. So now that we've gone over some of that, let's Oh, another interesting way to disconnect nodes. Let's connect a couple of these up. If you hold Y, it'll bring up a pair of scissors, and you can click and drag, and it will bring up a line, and you can just drag this around, and it will cut through all of the nodes that you have made connections to, which is another pretty nifty feature. So if we hit D in our network view, we can view the display options, and this allows us to show to modify things like when to show the rings. We can say to the ring will always be on, or only when we're zoomed out really far, so we can see nodes from tiny distances when they're really tiny from far away, or never. I usually leave mine on never because I don't really like the node rings, but you know, some people like them. So for my tutorials, I'll leave the node ring on. Similarly, we can display whether it shows the comment badge or how large it is, so we can make it quick and easy to see whether a node has a comment if we don't have the text displayed, or just hide that badge altogether if we don't want to see it. And you can do this with errors, warnings, and all the other icons that would show up next to your node. Another thing that Houdini does by default is this long wire fading. By default, it's set to the bottom down here. To demonstrate what that does, I'll just drag a null node off of this merge, and we'll make it really long. And you'll see it starts to fade away and become more and more transparent. This can sometimes make it hard for you to see nodes or how nodes connect along a chain. So I like to just keep wire fading off. It makes things easier to see. Working with nodes to make new connections, we can also alt-click on a node, and it will bring up this little null node dot that you can drag around and make new connections to. So we can drag this over and have it take over the transform, and then we'll merge, and you'll notice now that our transform, you are no longer a sphere. You'll notice that our transform is inheriting our box, and then our merge is, if we step through our chain, is taking the box without the transform here, and then the box with the transform here. So instead of having to make, for example, 2 boxes and doing something like this, we could instead just have box, there we go, that has all of our initial information and make modifications to it as we go down the chain. So when working with nodes, some other helpful things to help keeping your node networks organized is to modify the node color and shape. Node shape being something that is new to Houdini 16. You'll notice the merged node over here looks quite different than the transform or box nodes. So to modify node shape, we're going to hit S, and we get this block of custom node shapes down here. So we can select a node and just step through and find a shape that we like for our node. Similarly, we can hit C and choose a color that we want our node to be. This is generally something that I keep for personal organization, so the nodes that have certain parameters that I need to go to quickly are a different color so that I can find them more easy in my network, or maybe any UV nodes that I'm working with, I make a certain color, or group nodes, which we'll go into more later. Coloring your nodes makes it very easy to find them later on. Speaking of making things easier and organizing them, we can also select a group of nodes, and we can hit Shift O to make a network box around those nodes. And we can type up here in the thing, network box for my boxes. And we can shrink this, and now our network box, let's say we drag this out into make another null node. We can shrink this down. Similarly, just delete that network box. We can also select nodes and hit Shift-C to drop them into a subnet. This is similar to the object level to geometry level. We can dive into this subnet and then view our nodes and its outputs here, and then dive back up and perform more operations down below. So in this way we can create a group of nodes and basically template them to use in multiple places or make our network easier to navigate and not so cluttered. Another thing that we can work with is sticky notes, which are a very nice way to display lots of text in an editor. Say you're trying to explain something complicated or write an expression for something. So we can make a sticky note by clicking the sticky note tab up here. Same with the network box, this icon up here. And we can just start typing, say note. And with your sticky notes, we can resize them. We can select them and choose their color. Yeah, I think we're gonna leave off right there. And in the next couple videos, I'm going to be going over how to use some specific nodes and what exactly we can do in Houdini to create some minimal representation and defined relationships and expressions for our procedural geometry.